Recently, we designed a dungeon. Then, in the last episode, we filled it with encounters and combat. This time, we're going to draw it out, make it into a map that we can use to help our players have a good time. Hey fellow Game Masters, I'm Richard Quiner, and welcome back to Dungeons 101 Part 3, as this time we decide to draw a map for our dungeon. The reason this is Part 3 is because I pretty much believe that the actual map, a physical map of your dungeon, is secondary to the actual dungeon itself, or the design of the dungeon and the listing of encounters. So this is more of a, afterthought. You could have taken the dungeon last time and just played with that, but this gives you a visual reference to use. It gives, if you want to share it with your players, it gives your players a visual reference, and it helps you build a little more on it, but it's not a necessity for playing the game with your dungeon. This is more just like, if you want to. So this time we're going to be drawing this dungeon out and filling in all the details we need so we can have a nice note or a sheet of paper that gives us all the information we need. So what do we need? We need to have our dungeon descriptions from the previous episodes and the information on the encounters we have in those episodes. You also want to get some graph paper. Now, I like graph paper. I like the 1/4-inch graph paper, but I'm going to put a link in the description below for a website where you can go and download graph paper of any size or scale you want that you can use to draw your dungeon. You can download it and print it off, and it's cool, and you'll see that's what I do. That's what I use. It's neat. It's useful. You also need a pen or a pencil, something to draw with, of course. Now, just a quick side note before we get into this is there are a lot of softwares out there. There's a lot of dungeon drawing software, like apps or programs for your computer. I am not going to talk about that in this episode because that's secondary, and I don't want this episode to go into how to use the software. Maybe I'll do an episode on that later, but I just want you to focus on drawing your dungeon, and everyone knows how to use a piece of paper and a pencil, for the most part. I'm not judging if you don't. So when it comes to the graph paper, Now we're getting into actual design. When it comes to the graph paper, you have a scale. You have a lot of little squares, and each square is going to represent a certain size. In my case, for this particular dungeon, I'm saying 1 square equals 5 feet. What that translates to in Dungeons and Dragons or Pathfinder, most of the game systems, the squares equal kind of one space that a character can move. And breaking it down to 5-foot increments works really well for Dungeons and Dragons, and that's the system that I mainly play with. So you decide on the scale you want. If you have a very large super dungeon, one of those squares could be 10 feet, you could say, or 15, or however much you want. But in this case, this specific situation, 1 square equals 5 feet. That is the scale I'm going to work in, and that's why I'm also using 1/4-inch graph paper. Each square is 1/4 inch on each side, so 4 of those equals about 1 inch. And that gives me a good scale, and I can fit my entire dungeon on this 1 sheet of paper. So first thing you need to do is lay out the dungeon. Draw out your rooms on your graph paper. I say use a pencil so that if you need to erase things, you can. But if you're really confident in what you've got in your head, then go ahead and use a pen. But I like using a pencil. I like being able to erase my mistakes. So I draw out my dungeon. I put out my room. I have my coat room. I have my great hall entrance there. I have my secret panic room sitting off of the Great Hall, and I have my dining hall off to the side. I'm able to lay these out in the actual scale that they want. Remember, each square is 1 foot, so as I draw out these rooms, the coat room is small. It's a 10-foot by 10-foot room. It's very crowded for the players, but it's pretty small. The dining hall itself is a lot larger, probably about 30 feet across by about 100 feet long. The Great Hall is another very large kind of space, and the panic room, as I mentioned before, is about 20 feet long by 15 feet wide. So I'm able to lay all these out there in kind of a way that fits on this 1 sheet of paper, and I can look at it and see, there is my dungeon. Next, and I want you to think about this next part, and don't worry about being creative or artistic. Next, you lay in the details. Where are the coats gonna go? Where do the umbrellas go? Where are each of these armored statues gonna be placed in this dungeon? Where's the tables? Where's the food? Think of all these details and draw it out on your map. Try to keep it as scale as you can. So like the table, if I make the table too big, then it won't fit in the room. If I make it too small, then it just looks weird. So try to make it a nice scale size that will fill the room and make it look cool. If it's a permanent furniture fixture, you can draw it on there in the map. If it's not, if it's something that moves, and this is what I do, I like to use numbers and letters. So each room I will draw will have a number, 1, 2, 3, and 4. And then I will use letters to denote where things are as they can move around. So I'll use A, B, C, and D in each room. So let's say in the coat room, I have 1A, 1B, 1C, 1D. That denotes the coats, the umbrellas, the desk, maybe the door, these sort of moments, and I can mark them all down. And I suggest you do this even if you draw them out on your map. Label them 1A, 1B, 2C, whatever labels you want. Think of a system that works for you in your thing, because the next step, after you lay in the details of where everything is now you're going to list it out on the side. So if there's a trap, you want that on this map right here. You want a trap on the map, and you label it, and then you write it down off to the side that room 2A, which for me is the Great Hall. 2A is the Great Hall and the trap in it. That is a trip line that can be defeated with a roll higher than a 15 or something. I write it down on the side so I have a nice sheet of information as I go room for room, that I have all the information laid out in front of me. Now, this episode is a lot shorter, but how can you use this map in the game? And it's pretty simple. One, you can copy this map and remove all the little details and just give a map to your players so they have something to look at. And you keep a copy for yourself. You don't have to give your players the map, but you can. That's all I'm saying. You keep a copy for yourself with all the details. Then as the players go room for room, you have a list. So you have the picture, and then you have a list of everything that you have in each room. And you're able to use that to see where the players go and what they interact with. You have it already listed out. So there's no guesswork. There's no coming up with stuff on the fly here. Unless you want to, it's pretty laid out and structured for you. So you can use that in your game. So in the example of this game, as the players go from room 1, I can look on the sheet and I see, oh, room 2 is the Great Hall. And I can read the description that I wrote or describe it how I want. And I can see 2A is the trip line. They're going to encounter that right away. So I know that they have to roll or not look for it, or if they look for it, they have to roll. If they don't look for it, then they trigger it. And I can list down and I can see, oh, okay, if they miss this trap, then these armored statues attack them. And then I have listed armored statues equal goblins, or whatever information I want. I keep it in a neat order, and I'm not having all my papers spread everywhere because it's organized, and that's what half of being a game master is keeping organized and keeping things together in a neat pile, so to speak. So this is a good way to keep your dungeon organized. Now, if you decide you want to give your players a map to work with, oftentimes it's good to give them a full-scale battle map. Now, a full-scale battle map means a 1-inch square, or at least, let me rephrase this, a full-scale battle map in the Dungeons and Dragons terms means a 1-inch square equals 5 feet. So you want to be able to take your map that you drew and blow it up bigger, so the players can put their minis on this map. And we'll talk about minis in another episode, but this is the idea of using a battle map that you build from this map that you created. Alternately, you can give them a small version of this map for them to use as they decide where to go, and you don't have to put it on the table for them. They can just use their imagination and fill in the spaces and get the idea of their surroundings. Either option is up to you. You're the game master. You can do whatever you want. You don't even have to give them a map. And that's why I say, drawing this map is kind of secondary to designing the dungeon itself. It's not as important because most of the time I strongly encourage everyone to learn how to be descriptive with your words and to fill in the dungeon just by talking about it. Describing. Use your words to describe the dungeon, because giving someone a map, it might take away from that. So think that through as you're building this part of your dungeon, designing your map. If this is what you want, cool, go ahead, do it. It is more fun for the players sometimes, but decide if it's what you need for this or if you can just use your words to describe it. That's great too. And with that, we conclude the Dungeons 101 series. 3 parts, how to build your dungeon and fill it with encounters and draw a map for it. Pretty basic stuff. I probably didn't even need to break it down into 3 videos, but I wanted to. So I hope this helped you out. If you want to, leave a comment below. Let me know what dungeon you designed. How did you use your map? How are you going to use your map that you draw? Let me know, and if you have questions, feel free to ask in the comments below. Thank you for watching. I've been Richard Quiner. I hope this has helped, and we'll see you next time.